Hey, Church 5 in Philippi, we are really close to tying a bow around this book of Philippians. So here's the direction that we could go next. If you have something that you want to look at as a church, something that you think would encourage the church, maybe a psalm, maybe you've been kicking around a question in your mind, text that to me and we can look at it. We should finish up Philippians this week. What is one of the best things that can be said about Union Chapel? What is one of the most biblical things that could be said about Union Chapel? That we're kind. That this is a place where kindness flourishes. Let me read about Paul's kindness that Paul received kindness. How awesome would it be to say that you gave kindness to the Apostle Paul? Verse 14 of chapter 4, yet it was kind of you to share in my trouble. And you Philippians yourselves know that in the beginning of the gospel, when I left Macedonia, no church entered into partnership with me in giving and receiving except you, and you only. Even in Thessalonica, you sent me help for my needs once again. Not that I seek the gift, but I seek the fruit that increases to your credit. And I have received full payment and more. I am well supplied, having received from Epaphroditus the gift you sent, a fragrant offering, a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God. What is one of the best things that could be said about us, Union Chapel? That's a kind church. What do we notice about the kindness that Paul says? And then we'll wrap it up with a few things that we see about a kind church. Paul notices that it's his trouble, and yet kindness enters in. Kindness makes it a partnership. Whatever Paul suffers, the church suffers. Kindness is consistent. Kindness is willing to see a need. You heard, and you entered in again. Kindness is consistent. Biblical kindness isn't, hey, it's Christmas time, let's be kind. It's a consistent kindness that just is part of the fabric of the church. And Paul doesn't look at the kindness of the Philippian church and say, yeah, you're a church, you owe me. You know, how can you serve me? He doesn't even expect it, but he knows that God's kindness worked out through the church will pour over to him. And it's sign of the fruit. Paul is more excited about seeing the fruit of their salvation, the fruit to their credit. There's some question about what that means, but the fruit to their credit, Paul's excited about seeing that. And in fact, that probably caused him more joy than the actual gift. This church is growing in kindness, and it excites Paul. A few things about kindness. Number one, kindness seeks to meet needs. Where do we see needs? Where can we enter into partnership? Kindness ultimately will spread the gospel. Biblical kindness will ultimately spread the gospel, just as it's doing here with Paul as he's stuck. Number three, kindness shares in the priority of God, the acceptable worship. Look, if God were to smell the Philippian church, if he were to take a deep whiff, a deep sniff of the Philippian church, he would smell something that is acceptable, something that pleases him. It is a good odor. What does Union Chapel smell like? And then kindness leads to worship. You see that there in the fragrant offering, the sacrifices that are given. Kindness is always a sacrifice, and it leads to worship. Now, does that sound like somebody? Does that sound like Christ? In Ephesians 5:2, it talks about how Christ gave himself up as a fragrant offering and a sacrifice to God. Ultimately, Christ's kindness leads the church to repentance because his offering is the offering that sets us free. We are redeemed. We are a pleasing odor to God. And now we are free to be kind to one another as our spiritual act of worship. What do we smell like as a church? Do we smell like kindness? Do we smell acceptable to God? Love you, church. We'll see you tomorrow.